Vincent van Gogh's work as a painter spanned less than a decade, from 1880 till his death in July 1890, and yet his body of work became one of the most extensive of modern art. Both artist and prolific writer, Van Gogh also allowed the passion of his paintings to be reflected in letters to his brother Theo and artist friends.
Oh, Theo, how I long to be less of a burden to you.
These letters, over 700 in number, were collected and published by Theo's wife Johanna after the death of Vincent and Theo. Together, his words and his art provide us with a unique insight into the world of Van Gogh as a man and an artist. Thus, we will follow Vincent's footsteps through Holland and France to understand his vision of nature and the development of his art. Outside of Nuenen, the watermill of Gogh. The Cathedral Tower of Our Lady of Antwerp. In Nuenen, the house of the Protestant vicar Van Gogh. In Nuenen, the Reformed Church of Vicar Van Gogh. The house of Père Pilon on the Rue François. The house of Père Lacroix on the Rue du Grès. The old City Hall of Auvers. The Gothic Church of Auvers. On the outskirts of town, the Château d'Auvers. A cornfield with crossroads, north of the old cemetery. the courtyard and fountain of the Asylum de Saint-Paul in Saint-Rémy. The interior courtyard of the old hospital in Arles. The bar with rooms to let on the Place Lamartine, the yellow house of Vincent. The rebuilt Pont Langlois in Arles. The old Roman road in Arles, called Les Alicants.
There is something modern about a digger, a peasant.
The fate of the peasantry in Holland has been a subject for painters going back to the early Renaissance. Born in Flanders in 1528, Peter Bruegel was the first to popularize the rural culture of Flanders among the educated elite of Burgundy. Jan Steen continued the theme in 17th century Holland. Like Bruegel, he tried to give a moral message in his visions of the peasantry, that all worldly sophistication is temporary. It was a theme that would continue in the genre scenes of Dutch art. The 19th century painters in Holland often returned to the theme of peasant life as typical of a simpler and nostalgic past. But Vincent thought otherwise. The Industrial Revolution had led to great poverty in the south of Holland. As a result, tilling the land was not enough to make ends meet. Most peasants made crafts on the side and worked the weaving loom in their few spare hours. Indeed, the real meaning of the famous Potato Eater's painting is that farmers could not afford the meat of their own livestock. Despite the hardship, Brabant retained a rich culture which has continued to this day. Throughout his formative years, Vincent is always in search of models, and so he's overwhelmed by Impressionism. One by one, he samples the different movements until, in the end, he is ready to define his own personal style. Theo's art business of Goupil's in Montmartre gave him personal access to the Impressionists, who called themselves the Atelier of the Batignolles. Still, it is Monticelli, a painter from Marseille, whose influence is first and foremost. The impression of bold color and impasto will last forever. Next, it is Monet and Pissarro who impress Vincent with their visions of open air and light effects. Plein air, as Vincent calls it. The intimate portraits of Toulouse-Lautrec are also recognized, while a number of still life studies evoke Manet and Cézanne. Seurat's Sunday afternoon on the island of Grand Jatte is a sensation. So is his bizarre doctrine of fine dots of paint, which are supposed to blend in a complementary illusion of atmosphere. But the most lasting impression is reserved for the Japanese prints, or crépon as the avant-garde calls it. Père Tanguy sold them in his old paint shop. Most critics agree that in Arles, the art of Van Gogh enters a stable and highly personal period that could almost be called classical. Nature is no longer a mere snapshot as the Impressionists saw it, but is a mirror of powerful emotions and creative forces. To communicate these elements, Vincent uses code, a code of colors, an idea that was not unusual in the art of the 19th century. Yellow is a dominant color, and one that signifies friendship and love. Blue and black signify death and eternal life. The first painting to demonstrate this expressionism was the portrait of Vincent's friend, the painter Bock.
I want to paint a portrait of an artist friend. I want to put in it the appreciation and love that I have for him. And so I exaggerate the orange tones, chromes, and the pale yellow of his head.
Likewise, a starry night symbolized for Vincent the concept of divine eternity and ultimate salvation.
Toulouse-Lautrec had said that it is in the South that the studio of the future must be set up.
The South was a natural choice because it evoked the Japanese landscapes of the Crepon. Wild mountains, bright sunlight, and simplicity in form. A world far removed from the industrialized cities of the Victorian era. There was a school at work in Brittany in the north with painters like Paul Gauguin and Émile Bernard. The typical Pont-Aven style had been developed by Émile Bernard, a style of flat planes and strong contours, similar to stained glass.
Bernard has sent me photos of his canvases. They look like a dream, or perhaps even a nightmare.
Vincent had hoped that the Pont-Aven school would join him in Arles, making the studio of the Yellow House their winter quarters, but only Gauguin came. While in Arles, Gauguin tried to convert Vincent to the hallucinatory style of Pont-Aven. Vincent did try it out in a few works, but in the end he rejected it. It is this conflict of style and personality which ultimately sends Gauguin back to Paris, and with him goes Vincent's dream of the studio of the South.
I am not properly speaking mad, because my mind is absolutely clear at times.
Was Vincent insane? Dr. Perron, head of the asylum of Saint-Rémy, diagnosed epilepsy, as did Dr. Ray of the hospital in Arles. Modern experts have suggested a form of paranoid schizophrenia or simply an advanced stage of alcoholism. Others have speculated on the effects of digitalis, with which Vincent was treated, both in Saint-Rémy and later with Dr. Gachet in Auvergne. Modern critics no longer attach such great importance to the issue of Vincent's insanity. Clearly, Vincent suffered spells of total mental collapse. But beyond these periods, he remained an extraordinary artist with all the mental capacity he needed to paint.
I feel I no longer have desire for marriage and children at age 35, when it should be the opposite. Sometimes I hate this rotten painting. As they say, you lose in real love when you love art.
Indeed, Vincent's experiences with love were quite unhappy. Back in Holland, several rejections had driven Vincent into the arms of a prostitute called Sien in The Hague. Sien had a little girl, 11 years old, and soon thereafter gave birth to a son. Some writers have suggested that Vincent was the father. In Paris, Vincent became a regular at the cabaret restaurant Le Tambourin. The walls were covered with Japanese prints and modern paintings. The owner of the place, called Agostina Segatori, let Vincent exhibit his works as well. Vincent fell in love with her, and they had a stormy affair. As so often with Vincent, friendship led to quarrel. She threw him out. Much later, Vincent still fumed that she owed him money. Once in Arles, Vincent, together with Gauguin, would plan their budget to allow a visit once a week to the local brothel. It is here that he meets Rachel. After a fight with Gauguin, it is Rachel who receives Vincent's earlobe as a gift. It is the end of the relationship with both Rachel and Gauguin. There is one more young woman in Vincent's life, and she lived in Auvergne. She is the daughter of Ravoux, the innkeeper where Vincent lived up in the attic. Despite his fierce look and strange behavior, Adeline Ravoux takes a liking to Vincent. Sometimes, at night, she sneaks upstairs to kiss the painter goodnight. It is with her memory that Vincent dies in the late summer of 1890. Vincent was born on March 30, 1853, in a little village on the Dutch-Belgian border called Zundert. He was the second son of Theo and Anna van Gogh. Their first son, also called Vincent, had died on the day of his birth. Vincent is a nonconformist. He first works as an art dealer for Goupils in London and Paris, but to the despair of his parents, he is dismissed. Then follows a preoccupation with theology, and Vincent works as a lay missionary in the mining area of the Borinage in Belgium. Not until 1880 does Vincent truly discover his talent for art and for drawing. Without any means of income, he secures the moral and financial support of his brother Theo, who works as an art dealer in Paris. Once established, the arrangement remains in force. Until his final days in Auvers-sur-Oise, Vincent will be dependent on the weekly mail from Theo for his food, rent, brushes, and canvas. This is the land they call Brabant, in the south of Holland. A land of forests and scattered villages, graced with a peace that is timeless. Young Vincent grew up here, and the result, not surprisingly, was love. A lifelong attachment to nature as a place where man belongs.
Dear Theo, you know, there will always remain in us something of the Brabant fields. The Brabant of my dreams. Sometimes it's so close to reality.
No wonder that in 1880, Vincent returned to Brabant to pursue a new interest, a fascination with art, and drawing in particular.
What can I do? And then I told myself, I'll take up my pencil. I'll take up drawing, and from that moment, everything has changed for me.
Inspired by the great French painter of genre scenes, Jean-François Millet, Vincent made steady progress. By December 1883, his drawings already held the promise of great talent. From 1884 onward, Vincent lived in the village of Nuenen and stayed with his father, the Protestant vicar van Gogh. Here, Vincent decided to paint the harsh reality of the native peasants, weavers, spinners, toiling on their land. That, to Vincent, was the quintessence of Brabant.
I want to tell you that I'm working on the potato eaters. I've tried to emphasize that these people, eating their potatoes in the lamplight, have dug the earth with those very hands they put in the dish. And so it speaks of manual labor and how they've honestly earned their food.
The potato eaters had been done in the dark tonal palettes so typical of Vincent's Dutch period. In this respect, he had remained very much a Dutch painter. One who knew the old masters, admired their work, and took inspiration from it.
I would give 10 years of my life if I could sit in front of Rembrandt's The Jewish Bride for a fortnight, with only a crust of bread for food.
Another major source of inspiration were the painters of the School of The Hague, who drew inspiration from the old Dutch masters. Chief among them was Breitner, whose brushwork followed the light effects of Rembrandt and the French school of Barbizon. Vincent knew this school through the painter Anton Mauve, who for a brief time had been Vincent's teacher in The Hague.
Mauve has taught me to see many things that I didn't see before.
And so, by the end of 1885, Vincent's oeuvre comprised over 400 drawings and paintings. He had absorbed all he could in his native Holland, in the north and south.
There is a school in Paris, I believe, who call themselves the Impressionists.
Vincent was ready for something new. Paris, center of the avant-garde. Upon his arrival in Paris in 1886, Vincent plunged into the artistic circles of Montmartre, to which brother Theo introduced him.
There is only one Paris, and however hard living may be here, even if it became worse, the French air clears up the brain and does good.
Here were Monet, Pissarro, Toulouse-Lautrec, and Seurat. Here was Impressionism. What struck Vincent most was the Impressionists' control of color and light, and their celebration of sun, shadow, and reflection. As a result, Vincent's own palette seems to brighten. The dark tones of Nunen evaporate, first to medium tones, and then to the same imitation of light.
I know that these big, long canvases are hard to sell, but later on people will see that there's plein air, open air in them, made in a joyful mood.
Like many of the Impressionists, starting with Manet, Vincent shared a fascination for Japanese prints known as crépons. This art lacked the traditional conventions of linear perspective, shading, and tone. With their penchant for oblique views, the crépons were two-dimensional collages of form, rhythm, and pure color. Eager to understand their secret, Vincent made copies of the prints and applied their method to his own works. As 1887 drew to a close, Vincent became restless. There were quarrels. It was time to move on.
Oh, Theo, how I long to be less of a burden to you. I hope to make such progress that you may show my work with pride. I plan to go somewhere, down south.
There was a lot of talk of the light of southern France in those days. And so, one day, Vincent was gone. He had left for the coast of the Provence, for Arles. Vincent arrived in Arles shortly before the coming of the spring. The clear, crisp air filled him with joy and anxious anticipation of what he might accomplish here.
Dear Theo, the nature of this southern region is impossible to express in the color palette of the north. There's a strange sense of harmony in this profusion of colors. Slowly you begin to understand the development of painting.
Spring came, and Vincent was fully absorbed in painting the subtle tones of blossoms.
I'm currently absorbed by fruit trees in blossom. I'm not following any manner of style. I simply throw the paint on the canvas in swift strokes, and I leave them the way they are.
The spring of the Provence, with its brilliant variety of color, allowed Vincent to complete the chromatic experiments of his Paris period. Now, Vincent could begin to move beyond Impressionism and its casual observation to something that went deeper.
All that I learned in Paris is receding, and I'm returning to previous ideas. I wouldn't be surprised if the Impressionists soon find fault with my way of working.
Bright, shadeless colors, clear lines and solid forms. It was altogether a new image of nature, an image of essentials from which the irrelevant has been discarded.
I think the town of Arles was infinitely more beautiful once, but then if you take a second look, the old charm survives.
From May 1888 onward, Vincent lived in a house near the center of Arles, on the Place Lamartine. Perhaps it was here in the yellow house that Vincent's dream of building an artist's colony would come true. Exhausted by the heat and hard work, Vincent gradually discovered that colors could acquire a subjective power, that they could convey feelings and emotions.
Instead of trying to reproduce exactly what I have before my very eyes, I'm now using color more arbitrarily in order to express myself with greater force.
At night, Vincent would roam the late-night bars, the Café de Nuit, in search of companionship, absinthe, and models. But the warm glow of a cafe at night could be both alluring and deceptive. For it is here that a man thirsty and desolate would destroy himself.
In this picture, I've tried to express the terrible passions of humanity. There's a clashing contrast of reds and green in the figures of little hooligans and the innkeeper, always on the vigil in this furnace.
During these visits to night cafes, however, Vincent formed some interesting friendships. Men of Arles from various backgrounds, a postman, a lieutenant, their wives and friends.
Painting portraits brings out what is best and deepest in me.
In 1888, Paul Gauguin decided to come down south and join Vincent's studio of the Yellow House in Arles. But both painters soon realized how different they were, both in terms of style and character. They argued constantly.
Our arguments are terribly electric. There'll be further difficulties ahead for the both of us. Difficulties in ourselves, that is. Either he must definitely go, or else definitely stay.
After a fight with Gauguin in the Yellow House, Vincent is so enraged that he cuts his ear. Whereupon, Gauguin turns around and flees back to Paris. Now, Vincent is an outcast in the city. Some local citizens demand that he be thrown in jail. And so, the story ends here, in the hospital of Arles, where Vincent is put under the care of Dr. Ray.
I have no illusions about myself anymore, and I shall do everything the doctor says.
Again, it is spring, but the joy of the previous year has gone.
They're now forcing me to leave here. I'd better get used to the idea of staying in an asylum and think of subjects to paint there. Saint-Remy, June 1889. Dear Theo, I beg you, send me some ordinary brushes. My health is good, and my brain, well, let us hope it will be a matter of time and patience. Now it is a month since I came here, and not once have I had the least desire to be somewhere else. I just have the wish to work.
Nevertheless, the fear of recurrent attacks, the knowledge of an inner turmoil had affected Vincent's art deeply. The classical peace of Arles would never return, as he knew. Instead, nature in Vincent's hands was gradually transformed, captured by a nervous intensity. The skies, the fields, the torch-like cypresses all seem possessed by this strange cosmic energy. The earth is in turmoil, nature in flames.
It's horrible during the attacks, when I completely lose consciousness. But that only urges me on to work, as a miner in constant danger makes haste in all he does.
In February of 1890, Vincent once more suffered a serious attack so grave it took him several months to recover. His art betrays a strain, the fatigue and insecurity of this difficult time. Vincent once again returned to a practice of his Dutch period, working after prints by Millet, Daumier, and Delacroix, partly in want of models, partly to regain his balance. The last major work of Saint-Remy, Road with Cypress, Moon and Star, is also a key work to this period. Here the strains of creation are pervading the earth, taking control of the cycle of nature and the life of man. Pitiful pawns to the play of cosmic forces. In all, the tragic year in Saint-Remy had resulted in 250 paintings, all closely related in theme and style, yet virtually unique in their unbridled intensity. When Vincent was finally allowed to leave on May 16, 1890, he went back to Paris. Here, Theo and Pizarro had arranged his stay in the village of Vauvert, where an old friend, Dr. Gogh, could look after him. Vauvert on the Oise was so very different from the sun-baked soil of the Provence. A green landscape of gentle slopes and villages stretched along the river Oise.
This is almost a lush country, and there's much well-being in the air, lovely greenery in abundance, well kept.
Daubigny, Pizarro, and above all Cézanne had worked here. They all knew this remarkable figure, Paul Ferdinand Gachet. Gachet, a surgeon, amateur artist, and collector, who would now witness the final months of Vincent van Gogh. In a way, it was almost like coming home, back in the cool green north, with friends to talk and have dinner with. Not only at Gachet's, but also with the Ravoux family, owners of a small cafe where Vincent had rented a room in the attic. Yes, perhaps he had found at last the equivalent of Brabant under the bright sky of France. For a brief moment, there's a new conviction and self-confidence, a greater luxury of color and form.
I am completely absorbed in that unbounded plain of cornfields against the hills, immense as the sea. I'm altogether in a mood to do this, a mood of almost too great a calm.
But spring turned into the hot summer of July of 1890, and with it came hot winds and burning sun, thunderstorms, elements that once more stirred Vincent's restless soul. On a brief trip to the city to meet Theo, Johanna, and their newborn baby, Vincent had quarreled simply because he realized how much of a burden he had become to Theo's new family. A new depression set in.
Once again, I set to work, though the brush almost slipped from my fingers, and painted 3 big canvases.
It was an anguish that would lead to Vincent's last great masterpiece.
They are vast stretches of corn under troubled skies.
All over this harvest of the sun, endless waves of corn, dark and threatening clouds are moving in. The crows stir and flee in fear. The angular road in the center is a desperate attempt to find escape, but the path is a dead end, lost in the fields.
I didn't have to make an effort to express sadness and a loneliness that runs very, very deep.
And it is there, amid the tall stalks of corn, with the old pistol of Ravou, that Vincent shoots himself. Later, a witness, the Dutch painter Hirschig, wrote, "I can still see him, with his maimed ear and wild eyes, and I shall never forget him, coming in the cafe with his hand on his stomach. I can see him going up to his little bed in his little attic, in the grip of terrible pain." There he sat, propped up in the pillows, the bullet in his stomach, quietly smoking his pipe. Theo joined him the next day. At 1 o'clock in the morning on July 29, 1890, Vincent suddenly sits up in bed.
Theo, I wish I could die like this.
With these words, Vincent Willem van Gogh lies down and expires. Theo never recovered from his brother's death. He too died only 6 months later. Together, they rest in a grave in the old cemetery of Auvers-sur-Oise.
Well, dear Theo, the truth is, we can only make our paintings speak. But what's the use?
With these words, Vincent closed his last letter to his brother Theo. But he need not have despaired. In fact, there has seldom been a painter who after his death would become so universally known and loved as Vincent van Gogh. Today, in countless monuments, books, and exhibits, we try to make amends and bestow upon Vincent the love that he sought and never found in his lifetime.